Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So as you can see by the title, we're going to be talking a whole lot about Grady Hendrix today. Now, Grady Hendrix is one of those authors that I discovered through Nightworms, actually, back in 2020, right around the time that Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires had come out. The only thing that I knew about him previously is that he wrote a novel called Horror Store about a haunted IKEA-style store, but I never read anything from him, and I very, very quickly discovered that he is one of my go-to authors. However, I think Grady Hendrix is one of those polarizing authors. I think there are some people who love Hendrix, there are some people who hate Hendrix, and if you're me, I kind of have this love-hate relationship with some of his books, where I have novels from him that I absolutely adore, and novels from him that I am completely underwhelmed with. So I am currently about a third of the way through his latest 2025 release, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. Once I finish it, I will be doing a full in-depth review on my channel of this novel. But since this just came out in like the middle of January, I thought this would be a good time to do a video on whether or not Grady Hendrix is the right author for you, in case you've never read his work before, or you read something and it didn't quite click for you, or maybe you just picked up a book by him that was part of his earlier style and it didn't vibe the way that his newer style would. So we're going to sit and we're going to talk about all of the novels that I have read from Grady Hendrix thus far. I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether you guys should all read Grady Hendrix or not. I'm going to let you guys make that decision on your own. And if you're more interested in who Grady Hendrix is as an author, a couple years ago I did do an author spotlight on his work where I kind of go into his background and who he is and where his novels came from. But again, that was a couple years ago, so I don't believe I talk about how to sell a haunted house. Obviously, I don't talk about Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and I don't think I talk about Final Girl Support Group in that video. But definitely check that out if you want to learn more about Grady Hendrix. And I will say, I'm really enjoying Witchcraft for Wayward Girls so far. Again, I'm only a third of the way through. It's definitely a heavy read, but I like it. It does still have a lot of his kind of humor, and I love that it is once again set in a southern setting, and it is like kind of like a throwback era. This is set in 1969. I feel like a lot of his novels are set in different time periods than modern day, which is something that I really, really do love about Grady Hendrix. So in case you are unfamiliar with Grady Hendrix, he is a horror author who I think is the king of blending horror and humor. His books are witty, they are funny, they are dark, they are grotesque, but they're very, very evenly balanced. I think he does a really, really good way of kind of creating this own genre for himself, this kind of whimsical horror. There are some very, very scary scenes that he has written. There are some very disturbing scenes that he has written. There are some very dark topics that he touches on in a lot of his novels. Yet there tends to always be this kind of tongue-in-cheek humor that you get throughout them, and not necessarily like a dark humor that you get with some of like Christopher Triana's stuff. I think Christopher Triana is like such a funny author sometimes, but more of it is, it's his style is very, very bleak humor. Grady Hendrix really, really leans into it. So his first big breakout novel was Horror Store, which I have mentioned previously. I love this physical book. I will say this is one of those books that you should not e-read. It is so much better to have the actual physical copy of the book in front of you. It really feels like the directions that you get to put together like a piece of furniture when you buy it from IKEA. And this is obviously the novel about the haunted IKEA. I found this novel to be a fine debut. I thought this was funny, but I did feel that the kind of humor of this book was kind of this like one-trick pony of we are in a haunted IKEA of all places, and we are really, really leaning into kind of the ridiculousness of the setup of IKEA and the naming of the parts and the layout, and of course the kind of monotony that comes with being a retail worker. This novel is very, 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 very good at making you feel what it's like to work in retail, primarily because it is told through the perspective of retail workers. So I definitely liked that as somebody who worked in retail quite a lot as I was growing up and like going through college and stuff. I really felt that Grady Hendrix knew what he was talking about. But this is also one of those novels that has stuck with me the least from Hendrix's work. I remember being kind of let down by it in comparison to some of his other books that I had read. This wasn't the first thing that I read from him. I read A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampire, and then I read My Best Friend's Exorcism. So when I picked this up, I was really expecting this novel to be on that caliber, but it's not. Again, though, this is like his like big breakout, get your foot in the door novel. And I think it does a good job for kind of laying the groundwork of who Grady Hendrix is as an author, but I definitely don't think it's anywhere near his like magnum opus. If you're a fan of Grady Hendrix, I think this is a great novel to read once you know you already like Hendrix, but I wouldn't say that this is a great introduction to what he is truly capable of doing. So next we're going to talk about Final Girl Support Group. So this is probably the one novel by Grady Hendrix that I can pretty bluntly say that I really do not like. I'm unsure of the lore behind this book. I have heard that this was actually one of the first books he ever wrote and he couldn't get it published until he kind of had his career. So this actually might have been written before Horror Store. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I will say that it definitely feels like it was, because a lot of the like gems that I find in Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires and My Best Friend's Exorcism, I feel were really absent in this. I love the concept of this story, though. This is a story, I believe it's set in 2010. I believe it's set in 2010. And the premise of this is that all of these kind of 1980s Scream Queen survivors, these final girls that have survived basically all of the terrors of the classic slasher films from the 80s and 90s, are suddenly being tracked down again by another Jason, Freddy, Ghostface style killer and targeting them for being final girls. And they kind of band together and try and, well, figure out exactly what's happening and why. What was great about this is this whole novel kind of parodies famous horror slashers. So we have a parody of Ghostface, and we have one of Jason, and we have one of Freddy. And actually the one of Freddy is the most interesting part of this entire book. I actually want Grady Hendrix to go back and write an entire novel based solely on the Dream King. I believe that was his name. Because it's absolutely incredible, and it's really only touched upon very little throughout the novel, but it was definitely the thing that I was most intrigued by. Unfortunately, I just found a lot of this novel to kind of be a drag to get through. It wasn't as fast-paced, it wasn't as witty, it wasn't as intriguing as anything else that he has written, and it wasn't really humorous to me. There are definitely a lot of parodies and like the ridiculousness of 1980s and 90s slashers throughout it. But it also stars some pretty unlikable leads. I really did not like our main character, and she is a parody of Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is actually a film I have not seen, unfortunately. So I felt like a lot of that went over my head as well, because we're talking about these like top tier A-list slasher figures, and then our main character is tied to like kind of like a lower B-level slasher, I would say. Maybe even C-level. And so that to me, I felt just really didn't quite click for me. I really wanted to love this novel, but I didn't love the tone. I really hated our main characters. And I just felt that the pacing was so slow, which it bummed me out, because this is definitely one of the cooler concepts in like the world of meta slashers. I feel like this has become like a very big thing recently in horror lit, and I really liked the concept behind it, but I really didn't like the execution. And to me, I think it makes a lot more sense if we look at this as a novel that Grady Hendrix wrote before he really found his voice and was becoming a big name in the industry. It really feels like just out of place for where he is as an author now. So reading it after what I believe to be his best releases thus far was definitely a huge letdown for me. Okay, next up, We Sold Our Souls. This is such a wild story. I feel like this is another trend that's been surfacing recently, this kind of like rock and roll, like heavy metal horror story. Brom just did it with Evil in Me. And it's something that I think Grady Hendrix did really quite well in this. You also see it again with Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. And I will say this is one of those books where like I did enjoy what it was, but if you are not super into like 80s metal, I feel like this is another book that will go like way over your head. One of the things that Final Girl Support Group really felt dependent on was knowing the history of 80s and 90s slashers. Kind of the way that when you read My Heart is a Chainsaw with Stephen Graham Jones, you really have to have that knowledge to pick up a lot of the nuances within that novel. Knowing a lot about metal and the metal scene, and kind of like what that was like in the 80s is super beneficial. And this was just a book that it was kind of this like fun adventure story. I really liked the twists and turns that came in it, but at the end of the day, if you don't know a lot about the 80s metal scene, I feel like a lot of it will be lost on you. But this is definitely like a love letter to that genre. This is the story of, I believe she's a guitar player. She might have been a bassist. I think she's a guitar player. But a guitar player who finds out that the band that she was in, I believe in like the early 90s, is having a reunion alongside their one member whose solo career really took off. And she decides to go on a road trip to get to this music festival and kind of confront I believe it's the lead singer of the original band, on basically kicking the rest of them out of the band and like basically selling his soul to have the career that he has. It's really cool. It's really dark. Again, it's very funny. There are definitely a lot of really intriguing scenes. And again, like we really go deep into like the kind of like where are they now MTV moments of like what happens to like band members once the band disbands. And so I had a lot of fun with this novel, but I can see why this might not work for people. It's also, in my opinion, the least like horror-oriented of all of Grady Hendrix's novels. Again, there are a lot of horror elements to it. There's some really dark imagery, and it's a really like kind of fantastical adventure. But this is definitely on the lesser horror side, and it definitely leans a lot into like nostalgia and humor, but I still did enjoy this book. Okay. And then kind of in the same like realm as We Sold Our Souls, we have How to Sell a Haunted House. Now this was Grady Hendrix's release a year and a half ago, I want to say. And this novel, I think it has a very misleading title. I really wish this was not the name of this book, primarily because I don't think that's the plot of this novel. I really wanted, like, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, this is going to be really funny. It's going to be, like, realtors or house flippers who go in and try and sell a house, and it's haunted, and, like, things go awry. And that's, like, sort of tangentially, like, what is happening. But in reality, it is the story of a brother and sister who have to sell a house after their mom has died, and they do discover that it is haunted. It is haunted in a very strange and whimsical way. And the story is more about kind of defeating the actual haunting and understanding what is happening and their own family dynamics than it is actually about like this kind of kooky being unable to sell the house. They're really not actually actively trying to sell the house. It's about them getting the ghost out before they can put it into the market. So that to me was a little misleading of a title. However, I did really enjoy this book. I found this book to definitely be something that was worth the work to get through. Our two lead characters I found truly insufferable for the first like half of this novel, but this book is one of those books that shows a ton of growth with our characters. I found our ghost to be incredibly original, very cute, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. If you haven't read this, like, very cute, super creepy and disturbing at the same time, and just a really good look and glimpse into like these concepts of familial horror. If you've been on my channel for a while, I love familial horror, meaning horror about the family unit and the kind of expectations that people have in loyalty to their family solely because they are family. I think that this novel does an amazing job at highlighting some of the issues that can arise in a dysfunctional family. I thought it was really, really well done. I loved the Southern setting. Most of Grady Hendrix's books are set in the South, primarily South Carolina, which is where he is from. And I just thought that this was fantastic. And there is one of my favorite scenes ever, I think, in a novel, is the scene in this book where they, where our two leads are sitting in Waffle House. If you've ever been to a Waffle House, it's kind of like being in a Quentin Tarantino film in a fast food restaurant, or like a diner chain, I guess you would call it. Well, not only is it the most accurate depiction in media that I've ever seen of a Waffle House, but that whole scene changed how I looked at this book, and really made me go from kind of being like, oh God, I really don't know if this book is for me, to being like, this is a genius novel. So it was definitely a harder sell for me than some of Grady Hendrix's other works, but I look back very fondly on this book, and whenever I think of this book, I do think of that Waffle House scene and how I all of a sudden had such a change of heart about our main characters, and how it really made me look back on the first half of the book and see it in a completely new light. So I really enjoy this. This is probably not the best book to read as a starter Grady Hendrix novel, solely because it really is kind of, in my opinion, a work. It's work to get through, at least the first half of this book, but the payoff is so worth it. And I do really love the ghost. I love like the whole haunting concept. It's very creepy. It's very well done. And it's just a great glimpse at a dysfunctional family going through trying times, and like the reality of that situation being as kind of scary and terrifying as the evil hauntings that are happening at the same time. So definitely a fun one, and really bridges the gap that Grady Hendrix does of like very deep level storytelling with a lot of like emotion and highbrow concepts with his like lighthearted humor. This is a very, very great example of that. However, I think the best example of that is the Southern Book Club's Guide. I can never say this. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I do love this book. The more I look back on this book, the more fondly I think of this book. I will say, trigger warnings. There's a very, 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 very brutal scene that happens to one of our women in the book club, and it really took me off guard. This was the first thing I ever read from Grady Hendrix. I read it so quickly. This is such a fun read, but all of a sudden it gets very serious. It has a very brutal scene in it. And I don't necessarily love the kind of 1990s housewife, be loyal and obedient to your husband messaging that kind of goes on in this novel, which is why this is a 4-star read for me. I do think that it is a little unfeminist for how feminist of an author Grady Hendrix is. Now, I do understand that that's kind of a major plot point of this book, but it is something just to be aware of when reading this. This is the story. It kind of reminds me of Fright Night, the 80s film that was then like remade in like 2011, or like My Mom's Date with a Vampire, where we have this 1990s Southern housewife book club that gets infiltrated by like the sexy vampire next door. That is the premise of this novel. I think this novel is funny, it is witty, it is grotesque, it is scary. The setting is absolutely fantastic. And I just absolutely was turned into a huge Grady Hendrix fan after reading this. I definitely think this is an amazing starter book for Grady Hendrix. It really lays the groundwork and highlights a lot of what he can do, and really dives into the levels of extreme that he is willing to go to in a lot of his horror. I have heard that Witchcraft for Wayward Girls kind of goes into a similar vein as this. And as I'm already like a third of the way through, I can definitely see how that is probably the most similar to this out of everything that I have read from Grady Hendrix so far. I also love how Grady Hendrix almost primarily writes exclusively female leads. he's really good at writing very unique, strong, independent female leads and making it believable even though it's written from the perspective of a man. And I just think that this is just a fantastic example of like what Grady Hendrix can do and how he can make something really, really walk the line between horror and humor and equally elevate both in a way that you're still satisfied with kind of these like moments of like a palate cleanser because you just read a really heavy chapter and you read something really humorous, but then you still get that kind of gore and horror that you want from a vampire novel. And I also like that he doesn't really lean into the vampire Twilight romance cliches. It is very much more akin, I would say, to Fright Night than any other kind of like vampire that you get. Great, great, great. Super great novel. However, this is one of my favorite books of all time, I think. I love the cover. Like, everything about this is just, like, so vintage and fun and bizarre. But this is My Best Friend's Exorcism. And this is the story of two teenage girls in high school in the 1980s. And one becomes possessed and is able to use her demonic possession to become popular and kind of leave her kind of, like, nerdy best friend behind, and her nerdy best friend is trying her hardest to make sure that she can save her best friend from both demons and the kind of horrors of high school. I think this is a perfect example of humor and horror. There's a lot of horrific scenes in this novel. There's so many homages to the original 1974 Exorcist, right? I think it's 1974. There's a lot of tributes paid to a lot of iconic horror films in this as well. And every single chapter is themed after a 1980s pop song. And it is absolutely fabulous. I love our girls' relationships. I love how just, again, Grady Hendrix is able to write teenage girls in a way that is so believable that I almost was like, there's no way Grady Hendrix is a man. Just because he writes about being a teenage girl in such a way that was so relatable and real, and is able to do it again in a way that borders humor and horror and just knocked it out of the park. I have literally nothing bad to say about this book. I think the ending is perfect. The ending is this really kind of weird, almost nostalgic slice of life moment. And again, it felt just so real and tangible and relatable. And I was blown away finishing this novel at how perfect the ending was. Which I think is definitely something that's really, really hard to land. To have somebody like be on a 5-star read journey for the vast majority of the book. I feel like a lot of times you get to the ending and you're just kind of like, oh, that's it. But I remember like reading the ending and I went back and reread that final chapter because I was just like, wow. Like, that was heavy. That was real. That is how life works. And I was just so satisfied. And the setting is very similar setting to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It takes place about 10 years before, but still in like Charleston, South Carolina. And he nailed the Southern setting. My stepdad lived in Charleston for many, 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 many years. So I could just see that setting coming to life. What I really love about My Best Friend's Exorcism and Southern Book Club is that Grady Hendrix wrote this book to be basically about like the parents of the kids in this novel. And if you read these two back to back in some capacity, I read Book Club first and then read this, but I think you can really do either way. You really do see that it's just a continuation of the same town and the same community and the same group and just the same essence. And I love this. So this is definitely, I think, the must read from Grady Hendrix. I adore this novel. Full 5 stars. Definitely look back on it so fondly. I have to watch the film. I know that a movie came out on like Amazon, I think. Don't think it got that great of reviews. Grady Hendrix has written a couple scripts. I don't know if he actually wrote for that film though. But I would like to watch it just to kind of see some of these scenes come to life because they are so good and such just a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work. So yeah, that's what I would say. on Grady Hendrix. He's definitely not an author for everybody. He definitely has a very, very distinct style and voice, but he is an author that I personally really, really enjoy. And even the novels that I didn't love from him, I still see so many moments of like growth from his beginnings into where he is now. And I'm really, really, really excited to get through the rest of Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. It's definitely different than anything I have seen from him previously. Probably the closest to Southern Book Club, but definitely dark, definitely whimsical, and it has that like Southern nostalgia setting that he's so good at writing. And I'm really excited to see where this one goes. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy my videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!